So today we're going to talk about two things. The first is going to be another one of my ideas that I'm presenting. The second is going to be my explanation of what I'm doing in these early videos. So first is the idea that we're talking about today: duality or non-duality of nature. And this gets into philosophical stuff as well as spiritual stuff. And a lot of the philosophy of kind of like phenomenology and epistemology and the study of how things come about, what they are in relation to the world, in relation to each other, and sort of the nature of reality from a philosophical or metaphysical sense. So let's just start off by defining the two of them. So duality is this idea of separate things. So you're going to have like a physical material world and a spiritual world, or you might have like heaven and earth, or you have this fundamental break in things, or it might be like all of existence, and then like the Godhead, that and the two are separate. They interact, but they're fundamentally separate things. And then you have non-duality, which is the side that I land on. Non-duality is the idea that everything is inside of this reality. And that can go in a lot of directions. Both of these can go in a lot of directions. This is kind of like a broad bifurcation of things into two categories. You're going to have a lot of different, not necessarily agreeing with each other things within each of these, but it's kind of a way to differentiate ideas between each other. So non-duality is the idea that everything is all tied together. It's kind of my specific flavor of non-duality is that everything is of the world. Spiritual world, the mystical world, the metaphysical is all also manifest. It comes from the physical world. There's not this fundamental break between realms or realities. It's very much not a we're in the matrix thing. It's that this is the sum total of existence, and everything about it is encoded in it. And so, and you hear a lot about like the duality of man. So like a classic dual philosophical idea would be like the Platonic ideal. The idea that we're people in a cave seeing shadows of some higher perfect realm, and it can get into those ideas as well. It could be the split between a mathematical theoretical realm and a physical concrete realm. Or duality is that everything is encoded in this, that any experiences of the metaphysical or the spiritual or the mystical come from this somehow. There could be a million different ways that happens, but it's the idea that everything is tied together, and there isn't like separate multiple planes of reality. So like you'll have ideas like and even within ideas you'll have this split. You can take it in a dualistic or a non-dualistic sense. So like panpsychism and stuff like that. Like it's the idea that consciousness is this entirely separate thing that interacts with physical matter and kind of shapes it, but that it's completely separate, and like it's transmitting on its own frequencies. It's running in its own dimension. And that split to me seems not to be in alignment with with nature, with what we observe, with what we experience and see every day. Um, so, duality versus non-duality. I'm a non-dualist. Um, and then the second thing that I'm going to talk about is what I'm doing with these early videos. So I do have ideas of my own. I have thoughts of my own. I have things that I've built from other thoughts and ideas that I've had of extensions of those. I have my own flavor, and we're going to get to that. But to really be able to talk about that, so I'm big into syncretic practice. Um, I say I'm a syncretic spiritual person. So I've looked at a lot of different ideas, and I see a lot of the same things expressed in them, and I think they're all kind of different avenues that are kind of pointing to the same experience. And obviously not everything is. Like, people have very different ideas about reality. um, and I am one of those that thinks that there is a right and wrong answer. It's not just all hand wavy, anything goes. Um, there you can get answers. You may not get the how or the why or the what, but you can understand the quality of things, even if you don't know how it's working inside. That's another idea that I have, is that some of this stuff is kind of black boxes. We may not know the mechanism that it actually acts through, but we can observe the qualities of the thing, of what it's doing. Um, like in technology, you have the idea of black boxes. Like, you have this little box and it does a thing, and even if you don't understand what's happening inside of it, you can use that to do other things, or you can use that as a vehicle to achieve things or understand things, even if you don't understand what's inside of it. You can kind of understand its outside properties, how it's interacting with everything else, even if you don't know the mechanics of the thing inside the black box. And I think reality is the ultimate black box. To fully understand all of this, I think, is going to take the work of tens of thousands of years. If we're lucky, what follows our species, what we turn into, will eventually have those answers sometime, or maybe not. But I don't think you can rest your hat on having to have concrete physical answers for everything. But I think you can make a lot of progress without understanding what's going on inside the black box. And my argument is that, pre-scientific revolution and pre, like, the sweeping of the scientific Christian theology revolution across the world, people had figured out how to work with these black boxes really well. Their actual concrete physical explanations might be wrong, but their ideas aren't wrong. And it can do a lot of things for even modern people. I think we've forgotten more than I think in our idolization of the last 200 years of, like, scientific and technological progress. We've forgotten the spiritual and metaphysical and theological and philosophical progress that was made for thousands of years, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, before we came along. We set aside all of our ideas for the promise of understanding things through a strictly materialistic lens, and I think the modern world is kind of the answer to what happens when you do that, because the strictly materialist analysis hasn't provided anyone with any answers. We learned how to split the atom. We learned about quantum chromodynamics. We pierced into the physical reality of the universe, and our whole world and civilization went mad. We we went crazy. Um, so that's that's a lot of what I'm trying to do, is explain all of the thoughts that I've had in the last 20 some odd years of researching this. I'm 35. I've been reading ancient source material like the Tao Te Ching and stuff like that, and the Hagakure. The Hagakure was one of the first ones that I ever read, since I was like 12 years old, 13 years old. I'm 35 now, so I've been researching these things for a really long time, and the philosophy and the science and the math. Um, I've been I've been doing research in this realm for a long time, and to explain my ideas, I have to first explain a lot of the ideas that I'm drawing from as source material, because a lot of it isn't very well defined. Just a lot of it isn't well defined. A lot of it's kind of in like the footnotes and subtext of reading like these grand works that I might discard a bunch of, but I might find a nugget of truth that I can then integrate into this syncretic worldview that I've built. Um, and I'm not happy with the source material. I don't feel like I can just tell people to like reference a couple of books. This thing would just turn into a bibliography of every book I've ever read, and I can't expect people to read every book I've ever read. That's ridiculous. That should be part of my role as a communicator, and maybe an educator, whatever it is I'm doing, this infotainment that I'm trying to do. Um, that should be a part of it, is kind of me giving a rundown of this stuff. So, my YouTube videos don't get very many views. My TikTok videos get a few more. I'm not talking to a large audience right now, but I'm trying to build up a reference library for people to look at the ideas that I talk about, because when I start talking about my ideas, we're going to be throwing out these terms left and right. We're going to be mixing philosophy and spirituality and metaphysics and phenomenology and modern science and all kinds of stuff. That's the kind of thinker I am. I'm the dude that can synthesize something new from existing knowledge. Um, but to not just have it be rambling that nobody really understands because they don't get any of the references, they don't have any of the background source material. I have to build a library of the ideas that I've used to build these things, and to do that, I have to define kind of the opposite views as well. Like I said, I'm a non-dual person. I just read about Russellian monism, which not a lot of people talked about. Russell. Classical philosophy tends to center a whole bunch of thought on a very few thinkers, and then there's bunches of stuff around the outside. So I need to define that, and if I'm going to define what that is, I need to define kind of what the contrast is, because I feel like things only mean something in relation to other things, in relation to other ideas, and so I find myself having to kind of talk about everything in order to talk about anything, if that makes sense. Um, and that's what I'm doing here, is trying to build up this reference library so that people can understand what I'm talking about. Make no mistake, we are going to get into original ideas. I've got a bunch of them. I tend to be the person that goes off on their own and formulates thoughts. I don't accept anything at face value. I don't accept anything as a whole, or at least I haven't since I was a very young man. I used to throw myself headlong into ideas. Um, but I've learned since then that everything has shortcomings, and kind of the best way to build something new is to look at what exists, find the shortcomings, and then find other things that can supplement or differentiate or uh, clarify or define relationally um, ideas, and kind of build up this very solid, really sound in a number of ways idea that um, that, like I said, the ultimate goal of is to live better, is to find peace and good living. Um, so that's where we're going with this. Have a good day, guys.